All right, guys, so we are going to be doing a Q&A today. You will notice that I do not have my typical Q&A partner, Abel, with us today. We had a big falling out. We're no longer on speaking terms. No, actually, he has just got a rough schedule lately, and it's been hard to pair up here. So I'm going to do this one solo. We're going to see how it goes. I also just, in general, any content creator will tell you, sometimes it's not that they don't have content, it's just that barrier to record when it has to have a perfect setup. So I'd like to do a few things to kind of minimize that barrier and improve the setup a little bit. But in any case, for this one, we're just going to do a solo Q&A. I'm not doing any big editing. I'm just going to go ahead and record. You guys can let me know what you think about it. If you'd like some more of that kind of easy content, just putting out, a Q&A, or if you want to have it kind of more curated and whatnot. Obviously, the view count will also tell me that to see if people are more or less engaged. So we're going to go into today's Q&A. You guys can let me know if you have more questions down below. All right, so Nick G says, "Hi Dave, enjoyed the episode with Abel that came out today. Would love to hear you guys dive in on a future episode. What are your thoughts on high/low days versus a linear deficit when cutting below 10 to 12% body fat? Personally, I find it easier to stick with a consistent calorie target each day to stay in a groove, but I know there can be benefits to calorie cycling. Curious to hear your perspective. For context, I'm working to cut down 7 to 8% territory, probably about 10 to 12% now, so I can start to build again from there and maintain in the 10 to 15% range." All right, Nick, so if you go back to my earlier podcast, this is actually one of the things that I mentioned my mind was changed on with the last 5 to 10 years. So back when I was really getting into this, it was all about calorie cycling. I mean, there was ebooks written on how this was the secret. This is how bodybuilders were getting lean. And, they would do refeeds, they would do calorie cycling, they would do cheat days. And when I came across some people who were just doing a straight deficit, I thought that was nuts. Like I really, because again, what was just embedded in my brain from all of this content, I just thought it was so crazy. And that was like the old school way to do it in the 70s and 80s. Well, the reality is both work fine. I do think if you're getting very lean, it's helpful to have the occasional refeed, whether that's a psychological reward or a physiological reward. I think both are there. But for the most part, if you're just dieting from like 20% down to 10, 12%, you really don't need to have refeeds for the most part at all, as long as the deficit is reasonable. There was kind of the anecdote of Jeff Alberts when he started doing calorie cycling and refeeds. He came into contest shape 10 pounds heavier than previous years. But one, that's getting contest lean. Two, he probably was in a significantly less aggressive net deficit. So that's important to realize. So if the net deficit is similar, the results are likely going to be very similar. Personally, I do like the fluctuations, but I also like the fluctuations even during the quote unquote off season, just because I like to eat a little bit less during the week and eat significantly more on the weekends. And so for me, that works better, but I don't think there's some magic benefits. You put the high carb day on your back day. I mean, that's how it used to be in like your big workouts. It might help you fuel a little bit better. It might help you feel a little bit better, but for some people, it doesn't at all. I would say try it out. There are definitely people who notice a big difference. On average, though, it's not going to make a huge difference for most people. So try it and see what works for you and just what you prefer. All right, next question by David D. What is the best cardio recommendations if cutting for the first time with cardio? Past history was just diet. So you may have heard that the reality is cardio doesn't make a huge difference. If you look at studies, they'll often talk about how actually there are some studies that show no benefit to fat loss with cardio, but that the people maintain the fat loss longer term. I do think that it is a little simplistic to say that cardio doesn't benefit you. Obviously, you have the calories burned from cardio, but you also have to remember that you'd be burning calories anyway. So if you say, hey, the treadmill says I burned 300 calories, well, maybe in that time you would have burned 50 calories anyway. And so then it's really only a net benefit of 250 calories. And then you might be walking a little bit less. You might be a little bit more hungry. There are a lot of mechanisms in place where your body can kind of compensate and not completely undo the effect of cardio, but largely undo it if somebody's just kind of, let's say you're doing some low intensity walking added in, or you're doing some basic treadmill stuff, again, like an incline walking. That is not going to be super productive for fat loss. But the reality is when you look at people who live lean most of the year, when you look at the bodybuilders who are really getting very lean, most of them do implement cardio. And so I do think it's important for most people to have some. And of course, from a health standpoint, there's going to be that benefit as well. So I do recommend it. As far as how to implement it on a diet, and this is your first time doing so, I would say just start easy. You can implement 2 lower intensity sessions per week. If you're looking for the maximum health benefit, I do think there is a reason to add some higher intensity cardio, but I would keep a lower impact cardio. I would not be doing something that's super impactful, like running on concrete. I don't think you're going to lose all of your gains, but there's just not really a need to do it. So if this is for a fat loss phase, some low intensity cardio a few days a week is fine. And then if you want to add like one interval session a week, I think that's fine as well. Just know that it's not necessarily going to be burning all this extra fat, but it can mix it up a little bit. The whole idea behind this, post this epoch, right? Excess post oxygen consumption after high intensity cardio was really, really overblown back, 10, 15 years ago. There is a small benefit that exists there, but it's not nearly what people were purporting. Okay, Raphael asks, how many meals a day for optimal muscle growth? So again, if you go back 15 plus years ago, the idea that 6 or 7 meals a day was ideal was very prominent. I actually just saw an Instagram post by, forget the guy's name, Dave Palumbo. And he was saying how he was like, oh, let me give you an anecdote. And he was like, oh, look at how people get hot and sweaty on Thanksgiving, and it really increases your metabolism, which, if anything, was an argument for larger meals, not more frequent meals. But yeah, I was surprised to see the post, honestly, because it is such an outdated idea. Most people would agree that for optimal growth, once a day eating is not great. Twice a day is far, far better, still not ideal. Once you start getting to 3 to 4 meals a day, you're pretty much golden. I actually don't know if there's any studies that I've seen that show a benefit to more than 4 meals per day. It might be out there. I haven't seen them. I've talked before about how I used to feel like I had to eat every 2 to 3 hours. And it was really liberating to know that that was just not the case, that I could eat 3 meals a day, that I could go 5-6 hours without eating, and it was totally fine. Some people emphasize the first and last meal of the day as far as protein feeding. So, that first meal should be pretty heavy in protein. That last meal should be pretty heavy in protein. The middle meal, not as crucial, but should still have some protein in it. So at that point, you're really splitting hairs. The only reason to really go above that would be if you just need to get the calories in. So if you just are finding that I can't get that much in 3 meals for one reason or another, or I was doing the whole intermittent fasting thing with the 16-8, then you might want to spread it out a little bit more just to get the calories in. So Pavel asks, does a drop set performed after straight sets offer any significant benefits beyond the pump? So at the end of the day, it's just added volume, right? So I would say that if you're doing, let's say, 50-pound dumbbell curls for 10 reps, and then you just drop to the super light weight and you're just kind of pumping up and not taking it near failure, then no, that's mostly just going to be getting a pump. But if you instead go 50 pounds for 10 reps, and then you immediately drop and you do 35 for 8, and then you immediately drop and you do 25 for 8 or something like that, sure, you're just getting more hard volume in. Eric Helms was recently on the podcast and was talking about how if you look at the studies, they seem to kind of equate 4 drop sets, so 4 total with the drops, to 3 straight sets. So I've been doing that lately for leg extensions and leg curls. It's obviously faster. It's a very brutal, 50 plus rep set, but I'm doing 18 to 20 reps. Then I'm dropping the weight and I'm doing 10, 10, 10, something like that. And it's brutal, but it's efficient and it definitely counts as volume. So certainly more than just a pump. All right. Kevin asks, define maingaining precisely, and can you gain all your muscle doing it? So this is something that I always found it a little funny when people get into these definitions. They'll be like, oh, bulking is so terrible. But it's like, okay, but you're talking about gaining weight. So maingaining or gaintaining to me is basically somebody who is maintaining their weight. So you're basically trying to do a recomp. So then you'll hear somebody like Greg Doucette say, oh, no, you should actually just be in a 200 to 300 calorie surplus and gaining this amount of weight. All right, that's a bulk, right? That's not a quote unquote dirty bulk, but you are bulking up. You're gaining weight over time. So it's hard for me to say this is the definition of maingaining because people have different definitions. If I think of somebody who's maingaining, I think of somebody who's really trying to make a lot of progress while basically being in a calorie maintenance and just keeping their weight more or less the same. You can get into how the math works out with a pound of fat versus a pound of muscle and say that, you can technically be changing your weight without being in an exact maintenance, based on the tissue weight and then the water involved in the tissues. But without getting into the granular details there, you're basically saying a calorie maintenance level. So to me, when I refer to somebody as bulking, I'm just saying you're gaining weight. So it could be half a pound a week. It could be, a pound a week I think would be too aggressive for most people unless you're like a total beginner. But that's how I look at like bulking, is just gaining weight. Maingaining, can you gain all of your muscle doing it? Again, depends on how you're defining it. If you are saying to maintain your weight, then no, for sure you won't be able to gain all the muscle doing it, because if you're 150 pounds at 12% body fat to start, and then you want to get to the point that you're gaining 30 pounds of muscle, that just doesn't make sense. You're obviously not going to be able to just maintain that weight. But if you're saying, hey, can I just slowly add weight over time, 200 to 300 calorie surplus, slowly gaining weight, then sure, of course, if you're in any surplus, you could eventually gain all of your muscle over time. You could do an extremely slow bulk, but if you're doing that for 10 years, then eventually you're just going to be a huge guy and obese, frankly, because at that point you're eventually going to hit whatever your maximum level is. So yeah, so you can definitely take a slow and steady approach and gain all the muscle that you can gain. All right, so Paris asks, hey Dave, do you think alcohol is actually as bad for muscles as they say? I built quite a bit of muscle the last 3 years and yet drank about 500 calories a day worth during it. We have tons of college kids getting big and strong while drinking a lot. I'm wondering whether it's one of those things like protein and meal frequency, slightly overrated that is. Would be cool to know your thoughts. All right, so for one, I would say if you're drinking about 500 calories of alcohol, and that's actually from like the alcohol, the grams of alcohol itself, and not just the sugar that's in there, 500 grams of alcohol a day is a lot. Even if it is from just more sugary drinks, it's still a lot and probably not something I would advise. But to your point, obviously we have tons of people in college who are making tremendous gains while drinking, while not sleeping well, while doing whatever else they're doing. So I think a lot of these things are overemphasized. And the reason I say that is because you get some people who are making really great progress and they chalk it up to like this perfect, we said before, meal frequency or the perfect amount of protein. And these are things that I've emphasized for many, many years. But the reality is once you have your bases covered, you're going to get the majority of the results. And I mean the vast majority, okay? If you are ideally going to eat 200 grams of protein, but you're eating 150, that is going to slow you down a very small amount. If you would ideally get 8 hours of sleep, but you're consistently getting 7, that'll slow you down. But again, it's not going to be this massive, massive difference like some people talk about. I think at this point a lot of people know when Mike Israetel, I believe I was the one who first kind of like mentioned that, and then other people kind of took off with it. I'm sure other people obviously saw him say that, but I had specifically mentioned this quote when Mike Israetel said, well, sleep is far more anabolic than steroids. If you don't believe me, just don't sleep and see what happens. Which is obviously a very silly thing to say in that regard, because you could just take that extreme with anything, right? Oxygen is so much more anabolic than steroids. Don't believe me, just don't breathe. Or any example like that, right? There is a level where, yes, you need that, but more is not going to do anything beyond that. If you just hook yourself up to some oxygen tube, that's not just going to make you so anabolic, right? If you're good with 7.5 hours of sleep, trying to force 10 hours of sleep is not going to make you so anabolic. Even calories, that will be more anabolic, but the benefit is so small beyond a certain point. Whereas no, like if you double your dose of steroids, you will see a dramatic difference in the results. So obviously that's kind of a side point, but yeah, that is obviously a silly example. As far as the alcohol importance, I do think that if you're drinking, like let's say you're like, hey, I'm having 6 beers a day, is that going to cause you to not be able to gain muscle? No, but there's going to be negative downstream consequences of that. You're for sure going to inhibit the amount of muscle you could build. You're also probably going to be messing up your sleep, so that's going to be problematic. And again, just from your overall health, it's not something that's sustainable or a good idea. So no, I don't think it's an issue if you're having a couple of drinks here and there. But I would advise that just from a general health standpoint that you're not constantly drinking that much all the time. So just a quick one here. Somebody had said, this is out of topic, but could you make a video on the sugar diet? So prior to a month ago, I had not heard anybody talk about this. Now I'm seeing it all over. If you guys want a dedicated video, comment down below and I can make a video on that. I think somebody was talking about Mark Bell popularizing it and whatnot. So if you guys want to see that as an actual video, just comment down below and I can go into that. All right, Lewis says, hey David, I was wondering, do you think there's more potential growth by going RPE 10 even for leading reps? Or do you make sure to keep range of motion and technique standard, not necessarily do RPE 10 for the leading reps, meaning just like the beginning reps of a set? Of course, last reps are going to near failure with an RPE of 9 to 10 regardless. So basically he's asking, do you think you should be trying as hard as possible for those first reps? Because because I kind of clarify for him, obviously by definition, if you can do 10 reps, let's say, those first few reps are not going to be at 9 or 10 RPE, obviously. So what he had meant was, are you basically trying as hard as possible? This idea basically kind of flew in the face of some of the older ideas where it was like, hey, you should have this very slow and controlled tempo. There's a bodybuilder I won't name because I like the guy, but he was like a natural bodybuilder talking about how he would work out with this guy, and it was his old trainer, and he would have him go through these super slow reps, and it just killed him. It just gave him this crazy burn and all this stuff. And in reality, if anything, it was probably less effective than regular reps, right? So I don't think you need to necessarily try to do like this like dynamic effort, but I do think, there is data to suggest that you are going to recruit more motor fibers by trying as hard as you can. So if you're doing a 20 rep set, I don't think you need to be banging it out like the bar's about to fall out of your hands. I think at the end of the day, as long as you are pushing the sets to failure with sufficient volume and intensity, then you are, and again, by definition, you're hitting the intensity as far as an RPE standpoint intensity, not like a percentage of 1 rep max intensity, then you are probably going to be covered. I would not purposely go slow. I think on a given set, like if you're just looking at an individual set, there would be more recruitment in those initial reps by pushing as hard as possible. But I don't know if there's necessarily going to be more long-term growth by you doing that for every single set compared to if you just kind of do a natural repetition and then get to failure when that comes. Because at the end of the day, by the end of that set, you will have pushed everything as much as it can be pushed. And again, if you actually step away from maybe like a study on a single set and you actually just look anecdotally, most people are not just trying to like crank out as fast as humanly possible, right? They're usually not doing that. It's not something that I recommend. I do try to be explosive, but not necessarily to the point that I look like I'm floundering or anything like that. All right, so Wes asks, hey Dave, I'm curious what your typical diet and meals are maintaining this newer lower body fat. So for people who might be unaware, for a long time, I had maintained closer to 15% body fat. I would kind of go up to even like 18% body fat at its highest, and then I would cut down to maybe 12%. Last year, I decided I was going to cut down to closer to 10%. It was probably tied with the leanest I had ever been, and my expectation was that after I had done that I would be going up another 5 to 7 pounds and just kind of living at that 12 to 13%. I have found that I was able to actually maintain 10 to 11% pretty easily, and I may actually cut down closer to about 8% later at the end of this summer, just to see how it looks at this point and see if it's something that I want to try to maintain that. We'll see. So as far as what that means, right now I'm quote unquote eating whatever I want, but it's not whatever I want in the literal sense of, well, right now I'd like some pizza, so I'm going to have pizza, and I want some candy, so I'm going to have candy. It's I'm eating what I want in the confines of the dietary restrictions I have put in place. So what does that mean? Well, part of that is lower saturated fat. So people who have been following the channel know that I've done this lower saturated fat experiment for now at this point over a year. It's been almost a year and a half. And so what that means is that most days of the week, I am getting less than 15 grams of saturated fat per day. And then twice a week on average, I'm just having genuinely whatever I want. So it could be a pretty substantial cheat. I mean, those cheats could be easily 3,000 calorie meals, things like that. Just if I go to the beach and we're having, like pizza and ice cream or whatever, and I'll have that twice a week. My average calories during this time is about 3,000 calories a day. So it's not like I'm maintaining on some super low amount. I am eating a very healthy amount of calories, healthy just in the sense of like substantial. It's not something that I feel restricted. During my normal days, a typical day might be I wake up, I'll have like, just kind of like pre-workout supplement, nothing with like caffeine. It's just like some very basic stuff. I'll get my workout in. I'll do that fasted almost always. I really don't prefer the feeling of being kind of bloated or full when working out. And it just makes it easier for me to kind of go into that. And it's nice to kind of save the calories for afterwards. My breakfast could be anywhere from 600 calories if it's a lower calorie day to 12 or 1300 calories if it's a higher calorie day. Most of the time, that's either a protein shake, so with, let's say, 4 ounces of frozen strawberries, 4 ounces of frozen spinach, 4 or 5 ounces of frozen banana, some almond milk, green tea, whey protein, some PB2, and that'll be maybe like 400 or 500 calories. That'll be like a lower day. many days of the week, 4 or even 5 days of the week, I'm having these huge fruit bowl parfaits basically. So I'm taking 8 ounces of Greek yogurt, I'm putting 30 grams of whey protein in there, and I'll do, again, a pound to a pound and a half of fruit, depending on what I'm having that day. So peaches, pears, apples, blueberries, different berries there. A little bit of sugar-free syrup, and then peanut butter, depending on how many calories I'm trying to get in. That's my breakfast. Really enjoy it. Tastes fantastic to me. I mean, it's basically like a dessert to me. For lunch, if I'm at work, that's usually a lower calorie meal. And again, I'm very busy during the week, so I'm not really thinking too much about it. Could be some sauteed spinach, garlic, onions, chicken, and like some salsa and avocado. Today it was basically like a turkey burger with a little fat-free cheese and avocado. I love avocado. I probably have like an avocado a day. And so depending on the day of the week, that could be 400 up to maybe 600 calories. So it's a bigger breakfast, medium to small lunch. And then my dinner is usually my largest meal just because I prefer to have that. I like to be a little bit more full later in the day. Makes it a little easier for me to fall asleep as well. And that will be some sort of like sauteed vegetables with very lean, like 99% lean ground turkey with olive oil or avocado oil, and again, avocado. So it's a lot of the same stuff. Again, depending on how many calories I'm looking for that day, that could just be a sauteed vegetable, or it could be rice. Usually if it's on the weekend, like a Friday or a Sunday, then that might be my cheat meal or free meal, whatever you want to call it, where that's a significantly larger meal. And then my quote unquote dessert it could be oatmeal, it could be rarely cream of wheat, it could be this kind of like healthier cereal that I have. Sometimes it'll be, lately it's been a lot of these Ninja Creamies, so I made 1 or 2 videos on the Ninja Creamy. I've been having that probably 4 nights a week, and you can get, like 3 cups of this quote unquote ice cream for 300 or 400 calories. You could go lower that. I like the variations that are a little bit higher calories, but again, 3 cups of ice cream for 300 or 400 calories is basically nothing. Again, I might have a little bit of sugar-free syrup or a little bit of peanut butter on there, depending on how many calories I want. But yeah, that's my typical day. Once a week, I tend to get sushi, love sushi, but if it's not a cheat, then I'll keep it to healthier stuff like a California roll or a salmon avocado roll, things like that. Love sushi. And that's pretty standard for me. Most days are pretty similar. The reality is, even the people who say they like to eat varied foods and they say, oh, how do you eat the same thing every day? The average American, I think, rotates through like 20 standard meals, and then obviously you have the occasional variations. So that's pretty much it for that. And I'm finding this pretty easy. I'm interested to see if I go down another 5 pounds or so and get closer to that 8% body fat, if I'm going to find an increased food obsession. Right now, I really like food. I am kind of a foodie, but it's not something I'm thinking about all day, every day. We'll see once I get down to that lower weight, if I start to focus on it more and have that hunger kick in, because that's really what does a lot of people in, right? If you, nobody can just live hungry all the time. So if I were to eat junk food all the time now, I would be closer to that 15 to 17% body fat, because I just would be hungry and focused on it. So that's why I say it's within the confines of the dietary restrictions that I've set that I feel totally comfortable with my current calorie level. But there's pretty much nobody who is just able to live hungry all the time. If they're maintaining a very lean body fat, they are naturally a lean person, or they are using something to suppress their appetite. Sometimes you see that with, various drugs that people use now. Ozempic obviously becoming more popular, but they are doing something to limit their appetite. Nobody's just like brute forcing it through and just staying shredded all the time. The rare people that do end up having some sort of disorder, and that can lead to a lot of issues, obviously. So anyway, guys, that is it for today. Got through a good amount of questions there. It's actually pretty quick, a little bit less than half an hour here. So if you have other questions, put them down below. If you're interested in me just kind of cranking out some more content there, and you have video ideas that you want me to cover, let me know. I'm still sticking to about once a week lately, but the schedule has just gotten so busy, it's been difficult. But I always appreciate you guys checking these out. Feel free to subscribe for more, like, share it around, and I'll see you guys next time.